Well, greetings from South Carolina. This is David Gillespie here again, and we're in the series of the top trim on the Model A. This is a two-door sedan, July 1930. So if you've been following along with us on this series of how to replace the top fabric and the wood, and now we're up to the trim. The last video was about how to replace the drip rail. But today, this video is going to be how to replace this top molding at the very front, right behind the visor. So if you haven't already, please subscribe to our channel. It helps us out greatly. Also, if you can give us a thumbs up and a like. So when I got to this part of the restoration of the two-door sedan, I had a hard time finding any information, whether it be YouTube videos, any of the books that are out there. So I kind of had to ad-lib it and ask questions. I'd like to thank Eric Winiger with the Model A Medic, as well as Stephen Reed of Australia, for their input. So this is what worked for me, and it's not the most pristine job. This isn't a fine points restoration. This is just a car that I want to take around locally here in town. So if you're in the fine points mode, you may learn something from this. If not, then I apologize beforehand. So here is the finished product before we start. I just want to show you how it looks when it's done. This piece of channeling is aluminum, and so it's treated a little bit differently than the steel version at the back of the car. I'll have a separate video after this one, hopefully linked, that you can watch how I did the back piece of trim. But today we're just focusing on this piece of trim right here behind the visor. The best I could tell in the judging standards, the 1930 two-door sedan, which mine is a 55B body style, it would not have the Hightem welt up here at all. It would all be either the steel or the aluminum guttering or the drip rail. So I opted not to go with Hightem welt because, in my opinion, it's probably less, there's less longevity involved there, and I wanted this to last a little bit longer, which is why I went to all the effort to do the steel and aluminum trim. So now your body style may permit the use of the Hightem welt, or you may be one of those that's not concerned about being as accurate as far as the original is concerned. And if that's the case, then Hightem welt would be much easier, let me tell you, because this was a lot of work. So for the front piece of trim, I've got this here, which you nail in the middle, then you hammer down these two edges to form a seal somewhat. So that piece will go along the front here, along that row of tacks, and of course it'll have a little bit of a bend to it, and it should come down right on top of this piece here. Not in front of it from my understanding, but from right here. And in theory, it will not quite touch, just about a 1/16 off of that there. So here's how I did it. Here in the shop, I'm going to do our little annealing trick. To do that, I first take a Sharpie marker and just mark a little bit along the way here. And I'll use that to determine not to overheat it. So when I apply heat to it, that line will disappear, and exactly at that point I'll stop. I'm only going to anneal the last foot or foot and a half of it. I don't need to anneal the whole thing. The middle, I think, should bend enough on its own. So I'm just going to make a real beautiful artistic line here, about a foot, foot and a half down this way. So I found that the nat gas or propane gas torch will work just fine. Obviously acetylene will probably work too. Might be overkill. So I'm just going to apply heat to that sharpie line until the sharpie line disappears. Disappears, I'm ready to stop. Overheat it. Okay. So sharpie line has disappeared now. Before I overheat it, I'm going to stop. Just let it cool for a few minutes and see if we can bend it. Okay, so I literally just came out here and laid the piece across the middle and just taking my fingers and pressing it and twisting it with my hands. I've almost got it fitting perfectly except for the very tips at the edge. So there's a contour here and there's a slight contour this way. So I just picked it up and used my belly. I just pushed it into my stomach and kind of flexed it that way. This ain't a trailer queen, so I hope to use this thing. So I'll show you a little bit more along the way, but I've almost got it fitting pretty close, just with finger tight and using my belly as a form. More finger flexing. I've got this bent down to about where I want it, and I've cut back my top material back a little bit just so I can see it better. So now I've got my masking tape here showing me where the holes are to nail into, as you can see there. So I'm going to go to whichever side of the slot that the nail isn't, put my nail in through that way. So on the driver's side, I've got a lot more material left here so I can actually bend it easier. So I'm just bending it down here. I'm picking it up and I'm trying to get it to bend pretty nice and tight down in this area here. So I'm just going to hold it right here and then flex. Bend that just by hand, and it looks just fine to me. Still plenty of room to nail the nails through the hole. Okay, now I'm just trying to go and trim this top fabric back to get closer. Next, I'm going wherever I have a nail, I'm putting a Sharpie dot, and where there was already a slot, I drew the slot on there. So now when I cover this up with the caulking, I'll know where the nail is, and then I'll know where the slot is for me to have other opportunities to put the nail into here. So I did that all along the front, the back edge of the visor, that is. Okay, so now I've tri-fitted it as best as I can, and I went ahead and trimmed this off as close as I could to that angle there, like that. So I'm going to go ahead and soak this down with the butyl rubber caulking and get started trying to put it on. Okay, I'm a little bit excited about this and extremely nervous at the same time. Let's get that butyl rubber on and start putting this trim on. Now I've put the butyl rubber in a nice straight line, puddled it up real good. There we go. So right here, I just drilled the pilot hole for my screw nail and put in the first one somewhere toward the middle. I'm going to start in the middle and work my way to the outer edges here. So I used a punch and a nail set basically to get that down in between the tracks of that channel there. Here are the screw nails I'm using, just metal trim nails is what they're called. I got these at Ace Hardware. They're 7/8 of an inch long, and they have a spiral twist on them, and they're zinc. Okay, so I'm gonna drill another pilot hole here. Okay. Hope it goes in.
Using my great-grandpa's hammer, possibly my great-great-grandpa's hammer also. I think that helps.
Praise the Lord, there is some degree of flexibility to be able to pull it in a little bit at the very end, which is what I did here. So that way I can reroute it to almost touch where I want it to here to match up with the front. In the December 1930 Model A service bulletins, it shows this fella here taking a hacksaw and cutting off the trim. And I think I'm going to try that here. It says here, cut out ends of roof molding about a 1/16 inch above the drip molding to prevent any possibility of a squeak. A hacksaw is used for this purpose. So then it can be sanded and filed down. So I think I'm going to try that instead of a cutoff on my Dremel tool, just because I can't control it as well. not too bad. I put a tack in right there so it wasn't flopping around. So I feel like that turned out better than I expected. So okay, so I want you to see now, I've got a screw nail in the channel about every 3 inches or so, all the way down. And the butyl rubber is squirting through the holes. And I'm gonna try to smooth that out before I hammer it flush. I'm gonna just take my finger and run this bead down real smooth behind that also. Okay, so I took my finger, my pinky with my glove on, and run that bead down. Now I'm gonna try to put another string of butyl rubber down the middle here before I hammer it flat. Okay, now I'm going to take a little slotted screwdriver, and I just thin the sides of it down to make it super narrow. So now I'm going to take that super narrow slotted screwdriver and run it down the center of that channel. Okay, so now the fun part is hammering the 2 sides of it shut. So I'm using a piece of pine board and back and forth just using a rubber mallet, and it's working pretty good. I've heard all kind of different stories about how people do it, so you know, you can gently just hammer it too with a hammer, but I feel like it does just a little bit better to use a piece of board like this right here and just keep the board moving. So I have found inevitably that these screw nails are a larger head, and thusly they create these dimples because the piece of molding doesn't crease up along both sides as well as it should. So take note of that. Maybe you can use a better nail than I did. But what I'm going to do is take a file now and run it long ways over that to try to lessen that effect before I fill this gap with caulking. It isn't perfect, but it'll do for Pumpkin Town. So I took a file and then a sanding block here, a couple sanding blocks, and then a little steel wool, trying not to hit my visor or the top. I've masked the front of the visor, or the back of the visor, off with masking tape and ready to paint. One thing to keep in mind is this piece of trim, according to the judging standards, should be painted the same color as the visor. I knew that going into it, but it would be difficult for me to do that, so I just opted to use the enamel paint-on version because it's not a fine points restoration, and I found it to be a little bit easier. So if you're wanting to get it 100% authentic, you'll want to use the same body color of this this piece of the visor here. So next morning, everything's dry, and I'm gonna take off my masking tape and hope I didn't make a big mess underneath of it. I like it. That'll work. So now I've got to cut off this right here. So the last thing I'm going to do to this front here is, you can see there's a little bit of a gap there, and I'm going to go back with that butyl rubber and just fill in that crack and then wipe it off, hopefully. And there are a few little pinholes in the top fabric that I noticed, and I'm going to fill in those as well. Now here I'm just taking a scraper and scraping off the excess off of this top rail, as you can see, with a clay tool. And then this is what I'm going to finish up with, is a little Goo Gone on a rag to wipe off the excess. And here is the finished product. Praise the Lord, after its first trial run. I'd like to thank you for watching this video. Remember to please subscribe. And also, I'll put up a pop-up card somewhere on the screen to link it into the next video for the piece of steel trim for the back of the two-door sedan. Thanks for watching, y'all.